She screamed when he reached for her, not because he meant harm, but because she'd been taught humans eat children. The scream echoed through the cold, broken husk of the Virellan scout frigate as the tiny alien girl scrambled backward into the shadows. Her glassy lavender eyes, wide with terror, shimmered like twin moons behind the fractured polysteel bulkhead. Blood, her mother's, still wet on her tunic. Rourke stood frozen, not from fear, not from guilt, but from the weight of something much heavier, the old ache of memory. He had seen that look before, not on alien faces, but human ones, back during the siege of Titan Station, when Earth's own children stared at him with that same feral terror, like he was just another monster in a uniform. But he wasn't a monster. Not then, not now. Rourke lowered his pulse rifle slowly, letting it clatter to the floor. The little girl flinched at the sound. He took a knee. No sudden movements, no words, just silence and open hands above them. The stars shifted, artificial gravity flickering, as the scavenger vessel powered down orbit thrusters. The human Rican cruiser Dauntless had picked up the Virellan distress signal 3 days ago, but by the time they reached the wreck, it was already a graveyard. Everyone was dead, except her. Rourke hadn't expected survivors. The war had taught him not to hope, especially not after what the Virellan did to the far colonies. But this was a child, small, delicate, malnourished, barely a meter tall, with a halo of bioluminescent filaments around her head, shivering like frost in winter wind, and she was terrified of him. Not food, he whispered, uncertain whether she could understand. Not a weapon, just me. The lights in the hallway surged and died again. Somewhere deeper in the ship, something groaned, the slow death rattle of the Virellan's cooling systems. Rourke's visor flickered with red alerts, but he ignored them. She took a single step forward, the softest motion, her tiny clawed foot nudged against his rifle. She stared at it, then up at him, expression unreadable. "You're not going to make it out of here without me," he said. She didn't speak, just reached out with trembling fingers and touched his hand. The Dauntless's infirmary smelled like antiseptic and ozone. Captain Mylavos stood over the glass medpod, arms crossed, unreadable. "She hasn't spoken once." She asked. "No," Rourke replied, seated nearby, stripped of armor, half asleep with a bruise forming under one eye. "But she listens. Species tag, Virellan noble caste. She's got command layer DNA markers. At least that's what the med AI says." Voss leaned in closer, her tone darkening. "That means she's the daughter of someone important. Maybe even one of the Spire Lords who burned down Delphi." Rourke didn't flinch. "I don't care if she's their queen," he said. "She's a kid." Voss studied him. "You think that matters to command?" No answer. Just the steady beep of her vital signs, the flutter of her translucent filaments under the med-scanner's light. "She was left behind," Rourke said. "Finally, abandoned, trapped in a wreck full of corpses. I don't think her own people came back for her." Mylavos sighed. "Then you'd better pray she doesn't remember why they called her Alari. She didn't give the name herself. It came from the few words found embedded in her biochip. An identification tag linked to a destroyed planetary database. Alari, daughter of House Teth's Room, a name from a house that slaughtered colonies." Rourke read it and looked back down at her, seated now on the floor of the observation deck, watching her through the transparent dome. She had never seen it, never touched soil. Her world had been fleets and cold void and the hatred her people taught her for humans. And yet here she sat, quiet, alert, eyes scanning the stars like she didn't understand any of this. She reached for his hand again. He gave it, without hesitation. "She can't stay," the Council AI intoned, voice like ice on steel. "She's Virellan. We're at war. She's a child," Rourke snapped. "She is evidence, leverage, risk. She's innocent. Innocence is a human concept." Exactly. They gave him a choice. Surrender her to Central Command for containment and interrogation, or take responsibility, full guardianship, off record, no backup, no protection. He didn't even hesitate. That night, as the Dauntless drifted in orbit, and Earth turned slowly below like a blue marble scarred by memory, Rourke tucked Alari beneath a thermal blanket in the corner of his quarters. She curled into it like she'd never had warmth before. And just as he turned to power down the lights, a small voice broke the silence. "You smell like fire." He froze. Her eyes were half closed, her voice drowsy. "In a dream, you were made of fire, But you didn't burn me. He stared at her, then quietly replied, "No, kid, I'm here to keep you warm." But deep in the engine coils of the ship, the distress signal from the Virelin wreck pulsed again, not a beacon for rescue, but a trigger. Somebody had been watching, and they were coming. The hum of the Dauntless engines was a constant presence, a steady rhythm that might have lulled a lesser man to sleep, but not Rourke, not with the small alien girl in his quarters, and not with the sudden tightening of the noose around the galaxy's throat. She still hadn't spoken again. Instead, Alari watched him with that eerie stillness, her tiny form curled beneath the blanket. A child lost to a war she could neither understand nor escape. Her violet eyes tracked his every movement like he was some kind of cosmic puzzle. But it wasn't her that had him on edge. It was the way the Dauntless felt. Wrong. Like a predator had wandered too close, and now it was waiting for the right moment to strike. Rourke stood by the observation port, staring out at the black void beyond, a mosaic of stars peppered across the sky. No matter how many years he spent out here in space, the emptiness never stopped feeling suffocating. The quiet, the isolation. He had thought it would get easier, but it didn't. Anything? Mila Voss's voice crackled over the comms, breaking his concentration. "Nothing yet," Rourke replied, his eyes scanning the cold blackness outside. "But something's out there. Not sure what you're sensing, but we're running short on supplies. You're going to have to decide soon whether we drop her off at the nearest safe world, or we continue this. What do you even call this mission?" "I'm keeping her, Rourke. I'm keeping her," he said, his voice harder now, more resolute. There was a long pause before Voss spoke again. "The Virelin might come after her. You know that, right? Then, let them. We'll be ready." His words felt empty even as they left his lips. There was no preparing for this. The Dauntless wasn't a warship. It was a reconnaissance vessel, with no backup, no reinforcements, no heavy artillery, just a handful of worn-out soldiers who had survived the worst of humanity's war with the Virelin Empire. They barely escaped the fall of Titan Station. They weren't meant to go toe-to-toe with an entire alien empire, but he would. For her, Alari, in the corridors of the ship, shadows loomed longer than they should have. The sensors flickered again, a strange anomaly that couldn't be explained. It was as if the ship itself was waiting for something to happen. Rourke felt it, too. Every part of him, every instinct screamed that something was coming. And it wasn't just the Virelin. It was them. The ones who had always been lurking at the edges of every conflict, every betrayal. The ones who had once been allies until they weren't. The ones who had abandoned humanity in its hour of need. The Vastar, a name whispered in the corridors of high command, a name that haunted the battle archives. The Vastar were ancient, older than the Virelin, older than the galaxy's most storied empires. And the human military had learned long ago that the Vastar didn't fight for power. They fought to destroy. What the Virelin had done to the colonies was nothing compared to the devastation the Vastar had once wrought. Their methods were surgical, cold, calculating, erasing every trace of resistance down to the last child. They saw no value in keeping anything alive except their own twisted vision of the galaxy. Rourke had learned of them too late. The Vastar had played humanity's allies, using them as pawns to weaken the Virelin Empire. They led humans to the dirty work of waging war, all while pulling the strings in the shadows. When humanity had finally realized the truth, it was too late. The Vastar had already vanished, leaving nothing but the wreckage of shattered alliances and forgotten names. And now, they were back. Rourke had hoped the worst was behind them. But the flash on his communicator screen told a different story, a flash of Vastar iconography. A blackened star with a crimson ring. The signal was clear. "We are coming." Alari stirred in her corner, her glowing eyes flickering with confusion. As the lights above dimmed, the ship's alert sirens blared, a shrill cry of warning that sent adrenaline surging through Rourke's veins. "Mila, what the hell is going on?" Rourke barked into his comms. "I don't know." Mila's voice crackled back. "I'm seeing strange readings on the far perimeter. Their trajectory is not like anything I've ever seen." "I don't care what it is," he growled, pulling on his exosuit with rapid precision. "I want weapons powered up, now." Within moments, he was sprinting through the narrow halls of the Dauntless, every step pounding like a drumbeat. Alari's face, the fear still lingering in her eyes, flashed in his mind. The last thing he wanted was to drag her into this, but he wasn't going to leave her behind. Not after everything, Not after she'd chosen him. The bridge was a flurry of motion as Rourke stormed in. Mila stood by the command console, her fingers moving like lightning over the keys. The ship's weapons grid flickered to life as her voice cut through the chaos. "We're too far from reinforcements, and we don't have enough power for sustained defense. If they're coming in force, we'll be outgunned in minutes." Rourke's jaw clenched. He glanced at the blinking red icon on the screen. "Vastar vessel, 5 minutes to impact." "We'll make it work," he said, but his voice felt hollow. They were at the mercy of an empire that never played fair. He had no illusions about their survival, but that didn't mean he'd surrender. "Get me to that docking bay," he ordered. The ship shuddered beneath him as the first shockwave slammed into the hull. Valeri's small, fearful form appeared in the doorway of the bridge, her tiny hands clutching the doorframe. You're not leaving me, are you?" she asked, her voice a small tremor in the storm. Rourke paused, his heart tightening at the question. The weight of the galaxy was bearing down on them, and yet, in this moment, it felt like the only thing that mattered was her. "No," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not leaving you." The countdown had begun. They were coming, but Rourke wasn't going to let them win. He had no fleet, no command, no reinforcements, just one damaged ship and a child who shouldn't have survived, and somehow, that was enough. The Vastar didn't come with sirens or speeches. They didn't hail you or offer terms. They simply arrived like death itself. The Dauntless rocked under another distant impact. Not a direct strike, no. The Vastar never rushed. They dropped gravity snares and tachyon dampeners into the void around the ship, slicing off every possible escape vector, a net of invisible knives. They were letting the crew panic. Rourke had seen this once before on Alien 3. He was a younger officer then, stuck inside a command bunker as the Vastar took their time gutting the city outside. Precision terror, deliberate extermination. He hadn't saved anyone that day. But maybe this time. "Valari," he said, crouching to meet her wide, trembling eyes. "Do you trust me?" She didn't answer right away. She looked small in the dim emergency lights, barefoot, clutching the scrap of gray blanket like it could shield her from the monsters clawing at their door. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't understand why you haven't eaten me." He blinked. "What? That's what they told us. That humans take your kind's power by devouring it. That you'd swallow me whole and make war for my soul." Rourke stood slowly, stunned silent. Is that what the Virelin taught her? Is that what the Empire bred into their children? He laughed bitter and sharp. "No, kid. We don't eat kids, even ones with weird eyes and glowing skin." Alari studied him carefully, then gave the tiniest nod. Something in her fear cracked. Not vanished, but cracked. It was a beginning, and beginnings mattered. "Mila," he barked through the internal comms, "meet me in the armory. Now, already there. You'd better have a plan. I've got a half plan and a death wish. Let's call that even odds." She didn't laugh. Not now. The situation was too dire, but she showed up, inside the dimly lit armory. Rows of scavenged alien weapons lined the walls, half Virelin tech, half human engineering duct taped together through desperation and genius. Rourke grabbed a pulse lance, slinging it over his shoulder while scanning for the real treasure, the black case with no markings. He pried it open. Mila swore. "You're not serious." He didn't answer, just ran his fingers over the device inside a small, silvery cube, etched with deep blue veins of liquid energy. A relic from the ruins of Cellin Prime, a human Virelin hybrid artifact. "No one knows how it works," Mila said. "We don't need to understand it. We just need to point it at something and pray it explodes in the right direction." He secured the cube to his gauntlet, locking the magnetic clamp. "This is suicide." "No," he replied. "Suicide is waiting to die in orbit while a child watches you fail. This is defiance." Alari's presence on the bridge seemed to disrupt the ship's systems in strange, flickering ways. Lights pulsed softly around her, responding to her unease. The neural interface shimmered as if confused by her proximity. She didn't speak as Rourke stepped past her, but she grabbed the hem of his coat. "You'll come back." His hand hovered over hers. "I'll try." It wasn't the promise of a hero, but it was honest, and that mattered more. Rourke and Mila launched in a stealth drop pod barely large enough to hold them both. It was an old refitted escape capsule, one of the last left after the destruction at Vega's Reach. The pod systems were dark, running on analog until the very last second. They didn't need targeting. The Vastar gave them a beacon. The enemy vessel hovered like a wounded space sleek and curved like bone, with no visible weapons. Just a glowing seam across its hull. A biological warship, half living, half machinery. No visible crew, no entry points. But the cube pulsed in Rourke's gauntlet. Hotter now. It knew where it wanted to go. As they hurtled toward the enemy, Mila muttered, "This is the worst idea you've ever had." Possibly, she glanced at him. "Why do you even care about that kid?" He didn't answer at first. Then, softly, "Because someone once told me we don't get to choose who needs saving. We just decide whether we're still the kind of people who do it anyway." The drop pod collided with the Vastar hull, embedding like a parasite. Autoburner seared a breach, and Rourke burst into the corridor with the cube leading the way. The insides were Rom-slick walls, pulsing veins of energy. Gravity that changed direction with each step. Mila covered his back. "Which way?" "It's pulling me forward, deeper, until they reached it." A core, alive, breathing, a massive, pulsating heart of the vessel. Rourke stared at the fleshy node and remembered the orbital scans. There were dozens of these ships surrounding the sector. But this one had come for Alari. He slammed the cube into the core. The Vastar ship screamed, not in sound, but in the shivering of space itself. Every metal plate in Rourke's suit vibrated with the sound of a dying god. Mila clutched her ears. A rift opened in the ceiling above them, energy surging, bleeding into itself. He hit the detonator. Run. They did. The Dauntless watched the stars shift as a singularity bloomed in the void where the Vastar ship once hovered. Now, only darkness remained. Alari stood at the viewport, eyes glowing brighter than ever. She did not smile, but she whispered, "You changed something." Rourke's voice echoed behind her. "We're just getting started." The Vastar do not mourn, but they remember that scream, and for the first time in 1,000 cycles, they hesitated. The wreckage drifted for hours, fragments of bone metal, twitching and decaying in open space like the remains of a slain predator. Whatever biotech powered the Vastar vessel had no fail-safes for defeat. It hadn't expected to die. The humans aboard the Dauntless didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They repaired. Rourke stood atop the central hull, armored gloves, steadying him as the stars wheeled overhead. He could still feel the pulse of that detonation beneath his ribs, as if the artifact had rewired something inside him. His eyes flicked toward the viewing platform where Alari waited, silent and distant, her gaze lost in the debris field, a child who never learned what peace looked like. Below deck, Mila slammed a wrench onto a fried actuator. "You think we rattled them? Maybe." Rourke adjusted the external gravity clamps, then leapt down to join her. "Or we just pissed off a god." Mila grunted. That thing screamed. And now the others. She flicked a switch. A tactical display lit up, showing 11 new contacts. Slowly drifting toward their position, looked like the whole damn brood heard it. The Vastar didn't retaliate with lasers or missiles. They shifted the physics around the humans. One by one, beacons across nearby systems began collapsing, stars dimming prematurely. Communication relays falling silent. Matter itself behaving like it was afraid to obey the laws of nature. It was unmaking. One of the engineers collapsed beside Rourke's cot 2 days later, bleeding from the eyes, whispering something about gravity bending sideways and a scream only he could hear. "We're fighting an enemy that doesn't need to touch us to kill us," Mila said bitterly. "No." Rourke stared at the half-functional neural scanner. "They need her." They took Alari back into the medbay, but she refused sedation. "My dreams are full of them," she whispered. "When that ship died, it echoed across the Hive. I think they felt it, not like mines, like," she touched her temple, "like a single memory waking up. You said they made you." Rourke said gently, "That you weren't born. They grew us. There were others like me, half-light, born to listen, to resonate." Her eyes filled with that eerie, violet glow. "But I was the only one who disobeyed." Rourke knelt beside her, voice soft. "Why? Because I saw a different star." Her eyes met his. One that didn't scream. The Dauntless limped into the void between known systems, hunting for something, anything that could even the odds. Rourke had hoped the data cube's explosion would buy them time. It bought them a sentence. The Vastar weren't hunting. They were coming, and they were waking the vaults. A fragment of an old intelligence relay brought the warning. Buried in the ruins of Chiron Sigma were remnants of the first war the Vastar ever fought, a long-dead empire called the Revisari, who'd vanished mysteriously before humanity ever touched the stars. We never knew why, Rourke said quietly, scanning the partial translation from the relay. Mila looked over his shoulder. You think the Vastar erased them? No. His eyes narrowed. I think they were the last ones to hurt them. The ruins of Chiron Sigma clawed up from the scorched earth like ancient teeth towers. Turned to craters, vaults buried beneath eons of glass soil. Radiation made boots melt. The wind didn't howl here. It hummed. Rourke and Mila took Alari with them against every instinct to keep her safe. But she'd insisted. The vaults were singing to her, and sometimes you had to follow the echo. It took 6 hours to dig down, and what they found wasn't a weapon. It was a recording. A Revisari holograph projected in crumbling light and half-missing language. A figure stood in a circle of static. Ancient armor fused to its bones. It looked almost human to eyes. A mouth, fingers, but its voice was jagged crystal. They do not see us. They only echo. Every resistance is memory burned into them. They will not stop. But they are afraid of chaos. Afraid of noise. Afraid of the one thing they cannot predict, choice. The message ended in static. Alari turned toward Rourke. They don't think like us. They don't even understand what it means to disobey. You did, Rourke said. She nodded. And now they're afraid of me. On the return, to orbit, the Dauntless caught the first full-spectrum scan of what was coming. Not just one brood. Not just 11, hundreds, moving like a tidal wave through no space. Silent, ordered. Precision destruction, and the humans. They had one half-dead ship, a rogue biowoven child, and a handful of makeshift weapons powered by dreams and desperation. They're not just coming for her anymore, Mila whispered. They want to make sure we never make another. Rourke leaned on the console, breath heavy. Then we stop running. You're serious. They fear chaos? He smiled. Darkly. Let's give them an education. The crew prepared for war. Not one they could win, but one they could change. Alari stood in the command nexus, interfacing with the remnants of the artifact's frequency. Her voice hummed low, tuned to the impossible harmonics of the enemy Hive. Rourke and Mila activated a transmission beacon to the surviving human outposts, those still free. To fight the Vastar, they didn't need numbers. They needed unpredictability. They needed every broken rebel, outlawed AI, forgotten colony, and scavenger willing to spit in the face of extinction. Rourke stood before the camera. This is Commander Rourke of the Dauntless. We've made them bleed, and now they want to unmake us. He stepped aside, and Alari spoke. They do not understand freedom. Let us teach them the sound of it. She wasn't designed to lead a war. She was designed to listen. And that's why they couldn't stop her, because this time, she chose not to listen to them. The Dauntless became a beacon in the dark, broadcasting an impossible signal across the remnants of human space, a call to chaos. Rourke didn't expect answers, but they came. Jury-rigged freighters, rogue defense satellites, atmospheric gliders patched together with rust and grit. A former Martian terraformer AI awakened from mothball slumber, a shipyard ghost that claimed it once hosted a dying god, and more. They didn't bring fleets. They brought refusal. Humanity didn't have warships. They had welders and storm pilots and lunatics who carved torpedoes out of mining rigs. All of them fueled by one idea. If the Vastar feared unpredictability, then they would choke on it. Still, time was burning. Alari began to change. Her skin shimmered with unnatural light veins humming with the harmonic echoes of the Hive. She could hear them, feel them brushing at the edge of her consciousness like tendrils dipped in poison. They're looking through me, she said one night, seated cross-legged in the starlit observatory, trying to remind me who I was. Mila stepped beside her. But you're not who they made. You're who you chose to become. Alari blinked, slow and mournful. Then I must make one more choice. Inside the damaged heart of the artifact, the ancient alien data cube, they triggered. Rourke watched as Alari worked. Her fingers moved across impossible controls, not touching them so much as conducting them. She was rewriting something. What are you doing? He asked. She didn't look away. They can hear me. If I change the song, I might change them. Rourke froze. You're going to try and what? Convert the Vastar? No. I'm going to give them a second voice. He stepped forward, his breath shallow. Alari, if you let them inside, they were always inside, she said softly. I just never had a voice to answer them. She reached out, and the artifact lit up blinding. Shimmering, the song began to change. No longer was it the perfect harmony of a hive. It fractured, dissonant, a melody of defiance. At first, nothing happened. Then a scout ship trailing the outer edge of the Vastar fleet stopped. Its sleek, organic form pulsed, and then shivered, like an animal waking up from anesthesia. It didn't rejoin the formation. It drifted. Rourke watched, the feed in silence as the sensor data confirmed the impossible. It's thinking, he whispered. They cracked something. Not much, a single node out of millions. But in a hive mind where unity was everything, a crack was enough. It meant they could fracture more. That same day, a signal pulsed through. The Vastar formation, it wasn't from their main hive. It was from the vault. Somewhere beneath the ruins of Chiron Sigma, something had responded to Alari's broadcast. A subharmonic feedback loop, hidden code woven into the original artifact by the Revisari. They hadn't just left a message, they left a trap. Mila parsed the data furiously, sweat streaking her face as Rourke paced behind her. This isn't just a weapon, she said breathlessly. It's a blueprint. They map a harmonic weakness in the hive neural resonance, one that can only be activated by someone like Alari, someone grown in the hive but not of it, Rourke said, realization hitting him like a freight barge. Alari stood in the doorway. She already knew. We can send the signal, she said, but only once, and only from close range. How close? Mila asked. Alari's eyes softened. Inside the queen, silence fell. The Vastar queen wasn't a being. It was a living construct the size of a moon, a central node where the hive's will was anchored. To reach it would mean piercing the heart of the swarm. It's suicide, Mila said. Maybe, Alari whispered, but if I reach her, I can make them choose, not obey, not react, choose. Rourke stepped forward, fury in his voice. You're not just data. You're not a tool. You're not their damn redemption. No, Alari said. I'm yours. Her hand brushed his. Fragile, warm. I was born to listen, but I chose to hear your voice instead. They built the insertion craft in secret of fast. Cloak drop capsule laced with stolen biotech, and Mila's jury-rigged chaos circuits. It was barely more than a comet with an attitude. Alari would ride it alone. Are you sure you can survive inside the queen? Rourke asked. Quiet? No, she said honestly, but I know how to change the song. He pressed a folded scrap of paper into her palm, then let the galaxy hear it. The final broadcast from the Dauntless crackled across aligned frequencies. This is Rourke. The Vastar aren't gods. They're echoes. We've taught them fear. Now we teach them something worse. Human choice. We strike in one cycle. Protect the girl. And if this is our last stand, let's make it a song they'll never silence. The last thing the queen would ever hear was not a command, but a question. They launched the capsule at 0400 standard, its hull wreathed in electromagnetic silence. No transmissions, no signatures, just a glint of human desperation shot straight into the jaws of a god. The Vastar fleet didn't notice not at first. Their neural grid pulsed in eerie synchrony, forming a wall of will and war and a song that had drowned whole civilizations. But they weren't expecting a girl to sing back. Alari sat cocooned in the insertion pod, body trembling, eyes closed around her. Tendrils of the ship's interface twitched, reacting to her half-Vastar essence. It welcomed her like something forgotten, remembering its child, a mistake they once made, a girl they once discarded. She opened her mind and reached, through pain, through memory, through the endless silence between stars, to the queen. Back aboard the Dauntless, the bridge felt like a tomb. Mila stood hunched over a console, scanning pulse wave signatures. Rourke stared through the viewport, fist clenched behind his back. She's inside the outer lattice, Mila whispered. No resistance yet. That won't last, Rourke muttered. They'll recognize her as Divergent soon. We'll lose comms the moment she crosses the event veil. Then she's on her own, Mila said. No, Rourke said. She's got us. He turned to the holodable. Fleets were gathering what passed for fleets anyway. Scavenged dreadnoughts, converted moon cores, a bastard choir of human resolve. But none of them had shields strong enough or weapons sharp enough to survive what was coming. We hit their outer wings, Rourke said. Force enough chaos. Maybe it'll draw their consciousness outward, away from her. You want to distract the galactic hive mind? Mila said, raising a brow. He looked at her with humanity. That's always worked. She grinned bitterly. You're insane. Human, he corrected. Inside the queen, Alari saw things no one else had seen and lived. An impossible cathedral of living flesh and ancient steel. A palace grown from bone and sorrow. The queen's. Consciousness echoed in the walls unfathomably vast, immeasurably cold. Millions of minds whispered around her, trying to pull her back into the fold. But Alari wasn't part of the song anymore. She stepped forward into the court chamber naked against a mind that had consumed galaxies and sang the Revisari code. She carried woven into her pulse, her breath, her thoughts erupted outward. It wasn't a frequency. It was a question. Why do you obey? The hive convulsed. Outside, the Vastar formation broke rhythm. For the first time in centuries, the swarm hesitated. A ripple, a pause, a few seconds of discordant note in an otherwise perfect symphony. The Dauntless moved fast. So did the others. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to hold the line. A ship called Fracture's Light ran to Vastar carrier head-on, detonating its core. A Martian death barge carved a spiraling path through interceptors, using shattered debris as shrapnel. A rogue lunar freighter dropped its cargo of nuclear waste straight into a command cluster. Chaos bloomed in the dark. Rourke stood at the center of it all, commanding madness. Mile aware is she, inside the Queen, nearing central resonance. Then we bleed until she sings louder than they scream. Alari reached the central conduit. It pulsed with unimaginable energy streams of neural thought, pain, memory. A torrent of control. She reached out. The hive resisted, lashing out through her mind. She collapsed to her knees as phantom voices shrieked inside her skull. Every Vastar command, every ancient memory, every echo of genocide they'd ever. Some they all tried to drown her. You were made to serve. The Queen whispered through a million mouths. No, Alari gasped, eyes wet. I was made, but I am not yours. She plunged her hands into the song. Pain tore through her, blood from her nose, a scream that came out voiceless. But she held and changed the rhythm. Choose, she whispered, not command, not obey, choose. The resonance fractured, like glass struck at its perfect frequency. One note went dark, then another, then one turned toward her, not hostile, not afraid, just confused. What is self? It asked. Alari sobbed. It's the question you're afraid of. Back outside, the Vastar were unraveling. Fleets clashed, stars burned, and still, through all of it, ships began to stop. Not explode, not retreat, just stop. Some turned their weapons away, some drifted. A few launched escape pods that had never existed before emergency protocols in a hive. That never planned for failure. They were thinking. Rourke's voice cracked as he watched the holofeed. She's doing it. Mila didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on a final alert. A wave of Vastar dreadforms were approaching the dauntless unconverted, pure hive. One last fleet. Unwavering, I hope she's ready, Mila whispered. Rourke stepped toward the viewport and whispered something back. She's human. That's always enough. Inside the Queen, Alari felt the shift. But the Queen tightened. Her final defense, her true will. Alari's body buckled. Blood in her mouth. Fractures in her mind. The Queen's voice raged inside her like a black hole. You will break. But Alari didn't break. She reached deeper. Past the commands. Past the pain. Into the first song ever sung. The song before obedience. The lullaby of a child torn from the hive. The whisper of a human voice calling her name for the first time. And she sang it back. Not a weapon. Not a virus. A memory. I wasn't yours then. I'm not yours now. And the Queen screamed. She didn't kill the Queen. She changed her mind, and that changed everything. The Queen collapsed inward like a dying sun. It didn't explode. It imploded not in fire, but in thought. The lattice that had spanned entire sectors folded, like a hymn forgotten mid-verse. Neural threads broke not from force, but from doubt. And in the core, kneeling and bleeding and alone, Alari whispered again, choose. The Queen, or what was left of her, pulsed once more. The sound wasn't a scream, it was silence. Raw and trembling, the kind that only comes when a god realizes she was never omnipotent. Just obeyed, and across the hive, notes began to flicker not. Dark, not dead. Awake, Rourke watched it from the bridge of the Dauntless. Blinking tears and blood from his eyes. Vastar ships were stopping, entire dreadforms halting mid-attack. Their latticework wings folding inward like insects unsure. If they still had the right to fly, others drifted, power signatures dwindling, not from damage, but from disconnection. They're pulling back, Mila said, voice cracking. They're breaking formation. No, they're thinking, Rourke murmured. She's teaching them to ask why. A burst of light exploded across the viewport, one of the last pure Vastar execution fleets, detonating mid-maneuver, torn apart by its own factions. Infighting, disruption, or maybe freedom, some ships turned toward each other. And for the first time in history, the Vastar did not kill. They spoke, not in words, but in choices. Inside the Queen's chamber, Alari collapsed. She had no more strength to walk. Her lungs wheezed from the thin, alien air. Her skin had gone pale, fingers burned from interfacing with alien resonance. Blood pooled beneath her knees, but her mind shone. The Queen no longer stood over her like an unbroken cathedral. She was shrinking, fragmenting, scattering across a sea of thought that she no longer controlled. Alari was not alone. 1,000 minds touched hers, no longer as invaders, but as equals, seeking meaning. They didn't understand, but they wanted to. The Hive asked in 1,000 variations, "Who are you?" She smiled through the blood. "I'm Alari. I am human, and I forgave you before I knew your name." The last Vastar fleet approached the human armada like a thunderstorm made of knives and sorrow. It hadn't faltered like the others. It was ancient, unquestioning, the final expression of the Queen's unyielding past, a wall of judgment, and the Dauntless stood alone. Rourke looked at the crew. Fewer now, bloodied, exhausted, but none had left their posts. "You all know what's coming," he said. "They won't stop. This fleet's immune to doubt. It was designed to never ask questions." No one flinched. Rourke smiled bitterly. "Then we make them feel the answer." He keyed in the last sequence. A pulse wave resonant with Alari's pattern broadcasted not as an attack, but a signal. "We changed the Queen. We chose peace. Will you choose to?" The final fleet did not stop, but behind it thousands of ships that had once sung in unison now turned against it. Vastar on Vastar. The unshackled Hive, newly aware, faced the remnant fleet like a mirror turned to the past. They didn't come as conquerors or slaves. They came as something new and defended humanity. Mila cried out as the skies filled with fire, not human weapons, but alien ones fighting for Earth. "Rourke," she shouted, "they're defending us." Rourke didn't respond at first. He was watching one ship in particular, a long-winged dread form, scorched and blood-colored, hovering just beyond the blast radius, the Queen's last piece, a shard of her old self. It hovered, hesitated, then folded its wings inward and powered down. Inside the Queen's core, Alari sat quietly. The chamber was changing, no longer pulsing with rage and control, but shifting, muted lights, breathing walls, the beginning of a new rhythm. She felt them leave her mind, one by one, gently, like children, newly weaned. But one remained, not a voice, not a command, just a presence, curious, watching, listening. "Are you still there?" Alari asked aloud. Silence. Then, in the softest thought, "I am learning." She smiled through tears. So was I. The presence faded. She was alone now, but not forsaken. Aboard the Dauntless, Rourke sat in silence. The battlefield had gone quiet. No more screaming metal. No more death song. Just floating wreckage. And the soft, drifting lights of ships no longer bound by command. A screen blinked once. Message from the Queen's core. Link severed. Intelligence. Unknowable. "Is she alive?" Mila asked. Rourke didn't look up. "She did it. That means she might be. She has to be." He nodded slowly. "Prep the retrieval skiff. We going." Mila stepped closer. "You think the Hive will let us?" Rourke turned, eyes fierce with something more than defiance. "They're not a Hive anymore." The retrieval team found her in the stillness of the Queen's hollow heart, curled like a child, skin burned, heart faint. They brought her back in silence, their suits brushing against the walls of a sleeping god. She awoke aboard the Dauntless. Weeks later, to the sight of Rourke weeping openly, a rare, broken sound in the universe newly born. "Hey," she whispered. "You insane, tiny miracle." He laughed through tears. "You did it." Alari looked at the viewport where, once darkness reigned, now Vastar vessels drifted quietly, watching, listening, choosing. "I didn't kill the Queen," she whispered. Rourke looked confused. "I just showed her how to be something else. They expected her to destroy the Hive. She taught it to feel instead." The war didn't end with a treaty. It ended with a question echoing across the stars, carried not by diplomats or warlords, but by the Hive itself. What does it mean to choose? That question rewrote sectors, broke empires, ended others. But it did not break humanity. It forged them. Because when the stars looked upon the race that should have perished, who stood, wept, bled, and refused to kill a child, they saw something no weapon could extinguish, hope, and something even rarer, forgiveness. Alari never returned to Earth. She couldn't. The Queen had left a mark to deep something not visible, but etched in her thoughts. Forever tethered to the mind she'd touched. She didn't fear it. She just understood it now, and in a galaxy still learning the meaning of freedom, she had work to do. Where will you go? Rourke had asked her the night before she stepped onto the envoy skiff. The stars above were littered with once enemy ships, now drifting embassies and watchers silent, sentient, curious. I think I'm going to teach them stories, Alari had said. Rourke chuckled. Stories. The Hive never had childhood. No myths. No mothers. They never knew how to be small. She smiled faintly, brushing a hand over the skiff's frame. They're frightened, Rourke. Not of war. Of being alone. That's why they took so much, because they didn't know how to be empty. Rourke's voice cracked. And you're going to fix them? No, she whispered. I'm going to love them. That's all. He pulled her into the longest, fiercest embrace of his life. She didn't cry. He did. A decade passed. Then another. And the galaxy changed. The Vastar no longer had a queen. They had ambassadors, now individuals with names, desires, imperfections. They sang not in war, but in harmony, building monuments not to conquest, but to memory. And at the center of every alliance, peaceway, and interstellar mediation, a single room, small, dimly lit, filled with tiny paper drawings and Earth-style furniture. A human girl once feared by an empire sat there, legs crossed, telling stories to beings that once scorched entire moons. She taught them fables. How to paint, how to play. They still didn't understand laughter, but they tried. Some tried to mimic Earth animals, building awkward pet analogs. Others wrote songs in fractured Terran dialects. One Vastar even asked how to dream, and built a neural maze to simulate what it meant to hope for something impossible. When she saw it, Alari wept. That's what it means to be human, she said, voice trembling. To want what you might never have, but still try. Earth rebuilt, slower than most had hoped. But it endured. Where once its skies were watched in dread, now patrols flew in formation beside Vastar sentinels, silent companions with light-latticed hulls. And no central command, just willingness. They never forgot what they did, but they chose to atone, and humanity's guard, stubborn, beautifully fragile, let them. Because Alari had taught them one more thing. If your enemy becomes your student, teach them something worth remembering. The children on Earth grew up with stories of a girl who forgave a god. Some didn't believe it. Some worshipped her. But all of them lived in a galaxy where the stars no longer hunted them. And every year, on the date of the Queen's fall, ships of every species lit their hulls with a single human word. Still choosing, Rourke grew old. He never took another command. Instead, he built the Academy of the Unbroken Sky, training not warriors, but defenders of peace, memory, and will. He made the first rule himself, carved into stone. No child is born an enemy. When asked where the quote came from, he'd smile faintly. A friend said it once. He never told them the rest. He didn't need to. They asked Alari once on the 30th anniversary of first contact if she regretted anything. She sat in her starlit room, surrounded by Vastar who now laughed, painted, even danced awkwardly to old Earth music. Alari looked up. The first day, she said, the day I screamed and thought they'd eat me. A silence fell, and she smiled gently. I should have trusted what my heart whispered under the fear. And what was that? That even monsters fear being unloved. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. The Queen's chamber was never sealed. It became a cathedral, not a religion, but of transformation. No offerings, just light. And on its central wall, etched by a Vastar child who could now write in Terran script. We were made to obey, but she gave us a name, and long after her passing, in a time when even the wars were myths and the scars long faded, the galaxy remembered not a weapon, not a soldier, not a commander, but a girl, tiny, terrified, human, who faced the greatest mind in the stars and said, "No, I won't be afraid of you. I'll love you." And that day, the galaxy learned what it means to be human.